Welcome to my course on Dante's Divine Comedy. We're going to meet for 9 weeks. I'm going to try, although I'll be late tonight, but I'm going to try to stick to a schedule of about 11 or 12 cantos per week, which puts us in the right number to get 100 done by the end. There are a lot of ways to read this great epic poem. The ideal way is in Italian, straight through, and even if you're reading it in English, the ideal way is straight through once, and then go back and read a couple of cantos a day with the notes. And if you do that 2 a day, you'll have plenty of time to read 100 cantos by the time we're done. We have a little over 60 days to do it. There are lots of ways of approaching this great poem. And there's no way that any one person in one course can do all of them. The book is a pilgrimage. It tells the story of a pilgrimage, a religious and spiritual pilgrimage. It tells the story of a journey. It tells the story of it maps the universe, the structure of the universe, or we would call it astronomy. It's an autobiography. It's a material and spiritual autobiography. It is a recap of European history and of Italian history up to Dante's time. It is structured in some ways as a cathedral to which you walk in and then move towards the table of the Eucharist. It is a compendium of Catholic doctrine. It is a dream vision, which was the most common kind of allegorical poem in the Middle Ages. It's an epic poem, of course, in the tradition of Homer and Virgil. It's also extremely dramatic. There's drama going on successively all the way through. It is a translation into the vernacular of theological doctrine for everybody, for everyone to appreciate, rather than just the people who are educated in Latin. It's a math puzzle. It's a political tract. So, and many other things as well. So we're going to approach it in this way. The kind of general theme that I'm following is that we're going to follow the literal story, and we're going to see it as allegorically conveying spiritual realities, the condition of man, the spiritual condition of man in the context of an unfolding story. And that's how Dante structures the basic movement of the poem. We'll talk more about that in a moment. It is both extremely personal for Dante and extremely personal for every one of us. And it's also universal. That is, it applies universally to all people. I'm taking as my main guide Dorothy Sayers, who wrote a translation of the whole poem and wrote notes to it. And the reason I didn't assign you that is that it's a British translation, and it's kind of old-fashioned to our ears, and it's a little bit dense to read. So I assigned you to read the Chardy version, which is American and more modern, and I've been reading it again, and I really like the way it rolls along. There are a couple of places where the two commentators disagree, and I will point those out. And I'll tell you who my preferred interpretation gives my preferred interpretation. Of the common kind of poem of the time, the medieval dream vision, which these were also allegories, Dante's is by far the most personal, the most dramatic, the most engaging, the most complex, the most philosophically serious, spiritually challenging, and ultimately, in my opinion, satisfying. So, I'm going to talk a little about its structure, and then we're going to kind of plunge in. Well, let me give a little bit about a little background. I could spend the whole night giving you historical background, but I'm not going to. But So this is a list of the subjects of the poem. You ready? I'm going to read it fast. Universal history, past, present, future. Time and eternity. What does it mean to pass through time to eternity? Human history, from the creation to the biblical, to the classical times, to the present, to the last judgment. Italian history, Rome, the Church, the Holy Roman Empire, the Italian city-states, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Individual human history, the ages of man, this worldly happiness versus eternal happiness, body and soul, life and death. It's a personal history of Dante's life and exile. It's cosmological. The Ptolemaic universe is given explicit description. It's geographical. We get the whole geography of the world. It is only partly what we would call scientifically geographically correct. It is allegorically highly significant to geography. But Dante is a novelist in a sense, and he makes the geography fit the story to carry the point and makes it as close to what he knows about the geography of the world as he can. It's got classical philosophy, it's got politics and government, it's got psychology from Plato and Aristotle and Aquinas and from Dante's own experience. It's got as much science as Dante knew, including physics, chemistry, optics, and astronomy. It is an explication of the fundamental principles of Christian Catholic theology based on St. Thomas Aquinas and the doctors of the church. It's about language, Adam's language, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and the vernacular Italian. It's about classical and Christian learning, and it's about art, the visual arts, music, poetry, and epic poetry. The larger context, the larger historical context is, think of the Roman Empire, the ancient times, the Dark Ages, the High Middle Ages, and the Renaissance. And that's Dante right there at the cusp of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Think of Constantine and Byzantium versus the Western Empire, which is ravaged by tribes from the north. Rome is 5 times taken and 3 times sacked, and the government fled to Ravenna. The Western Church developed independently of secular authority. Charlemagne became the first Holy Roman Emperor in 800. The donation of Constantine, which turned out later, Dante didn't know it, to be a hoax, but was believed to be Constantine's leaving vast wealth to the church, which Dante finds to be the beginning of trouble because he believes that the church should not be a secular political power, but only a spiritual power in the world. There was a bargain concluded in 753 between Pope Stephen and the Frankish king Pepin the Short, in which a bunch of cities were put under the direct hegemony of the Pope, that is, political hegemony of the Pope. That's the source of what we call the papal states. All of these yielding trouble, as Dante sees it later on. Then we have the narrow historical context of Italy itself. A bundle of independent city republics held together, I'm quoting Dorothy Sayers, by common spiritual allegiance to Rome, nominal connection with the empire, and tradition of ancient Roman law, which was supposed to regulate the internal constitution of all the various states. Between one city and another, there was constant feud and rivalry, accompanied by continual shifting alliances for mutual defense or for combined aggression, perpetual territorial and ideological quarrels, corresponding to or crossing over political boundaries. There were 2 racial groups. The aristocracy descended from invaders and the native stock of burgesses and peasant classes. The aristocracy was divided by clans and by feuds among the clans and by family feuds within families within clans. Underneath it all was an ideological conflict between government by law and arbitrary government by military clique. I wrote to myself, sound familiar? The two political parties roughly were the Ghibellines. This is before Dante's time. Believed in the authority of the emperor, looked for support to the emperor, opposed the territorial power of the papacy, and was supported by the Germanic states. The Guelphs believed in constitutional government. They were of indigenous Italian stock, minor nobility, mercantile middle classes. Their motto was civic liberty. They wanted to shake off the yoke of the empire and look to the Pope for support against the Ghibelline clans. And they were supported by France, whom the Pope called in, the King of France, to support them. So this created a great conflict and various battles that Dante will keep mentioning, at one of which he fought when the Ghibellines were finally defeated by the Guelphs. All of this is accompanied by a tremendous flowering of wealth, culture, trade, the rediscovery of classical learning, patronizing arts and music, scholarship, universities, philosophy, and science. Now, that's a list. So any of those things I mentioned could take weeks and weeks of lecturing, which I'm not going to do. What kind of work is this? I've already said it's a journey, it's a pilgrimage, it's a spiritual autobiography, it's a dream vision. The radical thing about it is it's written in the vernacular Italian. Why? Dante wanted to share the point of it with everybody, not just with those educated in the church or in Latin. It is an epic poem that is also an allegory. So it tells a story, and the story unfolds in about a week from the time that Dante enters the dark wood to the time that he has his vision in paradise. And it's told with an extremely complicated mathematical precision. So there are 3 canticles of 33 cantos each, plus an introductory canto, which make 100 in all. And the parallels between, let's say, the 15th canto of each of the canticles is clear and deliberate. So there are parallels that go all the way through. The whole thing is built on 3 and multiples of 3. So 3 times 3 is 9. So 3 is the Trinity, and 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is unity, so that gives you 10. And that gives you the structure of various things within the poem. And then times 10 is 100, and that's the number of cantos altogether. It is a journey down and then up. You have to go down before you can go up. You have to feel the guilt of the sin before you can repent and be forgiven. It doesn't work the other way. You can't go up first and then down. So that's the way the journey unfolds. And it's written in what Dante invented, a rhyme scheme that Dante invented called terza rima, triple rhyme. What that means is that every rhyme word in the poem rhymes not with one other line, but with 2 other lines. So it's A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E, D, etc., all the way through. And in order to illustrate that by voice, I'm going to have my Italian scholar read the first, let's say, 6 or 7 tercets. Ariella. In a loud, booming voice, please.
Where do you want me to stop?
Read about 6 or 7 tercets.
Okay.
And we're looking, you can look in this first page of the handout I gave you and read along.
Nel mezzo del cammino di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. Hai quanto a dire qual era cosa dura, esta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte, nel pensier rinnova la paura. Tante amara che poco è più morte, ma per trattar del ben che io vi trovai, dirò dell'altre cose che vi ho scorte. Io non ven a ridir come io vedrai, Dante era pieno del sonno a quel punto, che la verace via abbandonata.
Okay, good. That's good. Thank you so much. All right, so if you were listening, you could hear. I'm going to emphasize now. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. Ah, quanto a dire qual era e cosa dura esta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte che nel pensiero rinnova la paura. So you hear what's happening. We have vita, smarrita. Then we have oscura, dura, paura. Then we have forte, morte, scorte, etc. All the way through. All the way through. The result of this is that everything is interlocking so that he keeps us moving forward. We don't stop. We don't get stuck anywhere. It's not like English rhymed couplets where after the second line, da-dum, 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 da-a, da-dum, 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 da-bay. Pause, breathe. No, it's so interlocking that it keeps us moving. And that goes all the way through, and it has 4 levels of interpretation, but I'm going to get to that now. So let me talk now about allegory. What is an allegory? It's a story told in symbols. But symbols can be purely symbolic, or they can be literal things that have a symbolic meaning to them. So I'm going to read to you now from Dorothy Sayers' introduction. I'm going to read a very big chunk, and we'll stop as we go, because I want you to understand what she's talking about. It's going to be the foundation of your appreciation of reading the whole book. So turn to the second page of the handout I gave you. On the left side, at the bottom full paragraph, she says, but if Dante is to speak to our condition, as the Quakers so charmingly put it, we must take him seriously and ourselves seriously. We must forget a great deal of the nonsense that is talked about Dante, all the legends about his sourness, arrogance, and obscurity, and especially the libel which, as Professor Vincent has observed, persists with the tenacity of an evil weed. This is why I jumped on Reggie before. Namely, that he was a peevish political exile who indulged his petty spites and prejudices by putting his enemies in hell and his friends in paradise. We need not forget that Dante is sublime, intellectual, and on occasion grim. But we must also be prepared to find him simple, homely, humorous, tender, and bubbling over with ecstasy. Nor must we look to find in him only a poet of period interest. He is a universal poet, speaking prophetically of God and the soul and society of men in their universal relations. We must also be prepared, while we are reading Dante, to accept the Christian and Catholic view of ourselves as responsible, rational beings. It's because of this that I'm allowed to give these talks in this church. Because if I were teaching anything that didn't correspond with Catholic doctrine, they wouldn't let me. But here I am. I'm picking this up because it's on the floor. We must abandon any idea that we are the slaves of chance or environment or our subconscious. Any vague notion of good and evil are merely relative terms, or that conduct and opinion do not really matter. Any comfortable persuasion that however shiftlessly we muddle through life, it will somehow or other come right on the night. We must try to believe that man's will is free. This is very hard to believe in our time, because we're told that we're the products of all these forces. That he can consciously exercise choice, and that his choice can be decisive to all eternity. My teacher used to say, it doesn't really matter whether we have free will or not. We think we do. And we all act as if we do, no matter what our theories tell us. So let's assume that that is a true reflection of reality and that we have at least some free will. Dante's going to investigate this question. How much do we have? For the Divine Comedy is precisely the drama of the soul's choice. It is not a fairy story, but a great Christian allegory deriving its power from the terror and splendor of the Christian revelation. Clear, hard thought went to its making. Its beauty is of that solid and indestructible sort that is built upon a framework of nobly proportioned bones. If we ignore the theological structure and merely browse about in it for detached purple passages and poetic bits and pieces, we shall be disappointed and never see the architectural grandeur of the poem as a whole. I'm not going to let you do that. People who tackle Dante in this superficial way seldom get beyond the picturesque squalors of the Inferno. This is why they teach the Inferno in all the colleges, and they almost never teach the Purgatorio and the Paradiso. I chose early in life never to do the one without the other two. This is as though we were to judge a great city after a few days spent underground among the cellars and sewers. It would not be surprising if we were to report only an impression of sordidness, suffocation, rats, fetor, and gloom. But the grim substructure is only there for the sake of the city, whose walls and spires stand up and take the morning. It is for the vision of God in the Paradiso that all the rest of the allegory exists. Reggie reminds me that when I get to the end of the poem, I burst into tears. You can plan on it. All right, now we're going to talk about, we're going to follow her and talk about what allegory is. And I know I'm doing a lot of reading here, but it's fundamental, and she says it so well that I'm riding on her coattails. Allegory is the interpretation of experience by means of images. In its simplest form, it is a kind of extended metaphor. Supposing we say, John very much wanted to do so-and-so, but hesitated for fear of the consequences. That is a plain statement. If we say, in John's mind, desire and fear contended for the mastery, we are already beginning to speak allegorically. John's mind has become a field of battle in which two personified emotions are carrying on a conflict. From this, we can easily proceed to build up a full-blown allegory. We can represent the object of John's ambition as a lady imprisoned in a castle, which is attacked by a knight called Desire and defended by a giant called Fear. And we can put in as much description of the place and people as will serve to make the story exciting. We can show Desire so badly battered by fear that he is discouraged and ready to give up, until rebuked by his squire called Shame, who takes him to have his wounds dressed by a cheerful lady named Hope. Later, he is accosted by a plausible stranger called Suspicion, who says that the lady is much less virtuous and good-looking than she is made out to be, and so forth, introducing as many personifications of this kind as may be needed to express John's successive changes of mind. In this way, we can work out quite a complicated psychological pattern and at the same time entertain the reader with an exciting and colorful tale of adventure. In this purest kind of allegory, John himself never appears. His psyche is merely the landscape in which his personified feelings carry out their maneuvers. But there is also a form in which John himself, or what we may perhaps call John's conscious self or super self, figures among the personages of the allegory as a pilgrim or a knight errant, exploring the wildernesses of his own soul and fighting against opposition both from within and without. The earlier part of the Romance of the Rose is an example of the first kind of allegory, and the Pilgrim's Progress of the second. In neither kind does the actual story pretend to be a relation of fact. In its literal meaning, the whole tale is fiction. The allegorical meaning is the true story. Clear? Questions so far? Okay, now the complexity starts. Dante's allegory is more complex. It differs from the standard type in two ways. One, in its literal meaning, the story is, up to a certain point, and with a great many important qualifications, intended to be a true story. The figures of the allegory, instead of being personified abstractions, are symbolic personages. To take the second point first, in dealing with the vexed subject of symbolism, we shall save ourselves much bewilderment of mind by realizing that there are two kinds of symbols. A conventional symbol is a sign arbitrarily chosen to represent or stand for something with which it has no integral connection. Thus, the scrawl X may, by common agreement, stand in mathematics for what? An unknown quantity. In the alphabet, for a sound composed of a cluck and a hiss. At the end of a letter, for a fond embrace. The figure X is not in itself any of these things and tells us nothing about them. Any other sign would serve the same purpose if we agreed to accept it so. That's what she means by conventional. Nor is there any reason why the same sign should not stand, if we agreed that it should, for quite different things, infinity or a murmuring sound or a threat. With this kind of symbol, we need not now concern ourselves except to distinguish it from the other. So that's the conventional symbol, which Dante does not use. A natural symbol is not an arbitrary sign, but a thing really existing, which by its very nature stands for and images forth a greater reality of which it is itself an instance. Thus, she gives an example, an arch maintaining itself as it does by a balance of opposing strains is a natural symbol of that stability in tension by which the whole universe maintains itself. So you know the principle of an arch, right? The rocks are going to fall down unless they lean against each other. And there's a keystone that's shaped this way so it doesn't fall through. And because you have got these two gravitational pulls downward, but the arch itself preventing the fall, you can build anything on top of it and it'll be stable. Its significance, that is the arch, is the same in all languages and in all circumstances, and may be applied indifferently to physical, psychical, or spiritual experience. Dante symbolism is of this kind. To avoid confusion with the conventional or arbitrary symbol, I shall follow the example of Charles Williams and others and refer to Dante's natural symbols as his images. So as I'm reading you bits from her notes to the Divine Comedy, sections after each canto are called the images, or the major images. And always they are those natural symbols of allegorical meanings. We are now in a position to distinguish between a simple allegorical figure and a symbolic image. The allegorical figure is a personified abstraction. Thus, in an allegorical mask, tyranny might be represented as a demon with a club in one hand and a set of fetters in the other, riding in a juggernaut chariot drawn by tigers over the bodies of youth, innocence, happiness, and whatnot, and declaiming sentiments appropriate to tyrannical passions. In a play using symbolic imagery, the dramatist might bring in the figure of Nero or Hitler, wearing his ordinary clothes and simply talking like Nero or Hitler. And everyone would understand that this personage was meant for the image of tyranny. In the comedy, Dante uses the allegorical figure only occasionally. By far the greater number of his figures are symbolic images. Thus, he is accompanied through hell not by a personified abstraction called reason, or wisdom, or science, or art, or statecraft, but by Virgil the poet, a real person who is by his own nature qualified to symbolize all these abstractions. The characters encountered in the circles of hell, purgatory, and paradise are similarly not personifications of sin and virtue, but the souls of real people, represented as remaining in or purging off their sins or experiencing the fruition of their virtues. Remaining in their sins in Inferno, purging off their sins in Purgatorio, and experiencing the fruition of their virtues in Paradiso. Being thus real personages, the images of the Divine Comedy are set in a real environment. Hell, purgatory, and heaven are not a fiction invented to carry the allegory, but a true picture of the three states of the life after death. Okay, that's fighting words for some people. A true picture, how does he know? I do not, of course, mean by this that Dante's description of them is meant to be physically accurate. He did not really suppose that hell was a pit extending from a little way below the foundations of Jerusalem to the center of the earth, or that purgatory was a mountainous island in the Antipodes, or that a person could go from one to the other in his mortal body in the space of 2.5 days, nor did he really imagine that heaven was located among the celestial spheres. He takes the utmost pains to make his geographical details plausible and scientifically correct. But that is just the novelist's method of giving verisimilitude to the story. Dante knew better, and from time to time he warns his readers against mistaking a work of the imagination for a bald statement of material fact. He did, however, share the belief of all Catholic Christians that every living soul in the world has to make a choice between accepting or rejecting God, and that at the moment of death it will discover what it has chosen, whether to remain in the outer darkness of the alien self, knowing God only as terror and judgment and pain, or to pass joyfully through the strenuous purgation which fits it to endure and enjoy eternally the unveiled presence of God. All right, I'll stop there for a minute. Questions? You get the point about personified abstractions, yes? So we're going to be talking about who these people are historically in order to understand what they represent allegorically. But although the literal study of the comedy is, with the qualification and within the limits I've mentioned, a true one, and the characters in it are real people, the poem is nevertheless an allegory. The literal meaning is the least important part of it. Did I shout that loud enough? The story with its images is only there for the sake of the truth which it symbolizes. And the real environment within which all the events take place is the human soul. Mine, yours, everyone's, including Dante's. Since Dante has suffered a good deal at the hands of readers who suppose him to be interested only in the post-mortal destination of his friends and enemies, let us hear what he himself has to say on the subject. We have a letter written to his patron, Can Grande della Scala. That's the Scaliger family. He was the third son and the head of the house by the time Dante was living with him and dedicating, the last, maybe it was the Purgatorio or the Paradiso to him. He writes to him as follows. And he writes a fair copy of the Divine Comedy, and he sends Can Grande that copy every 3 or 4 cantos. He sends him to read it. In his letter, he explains the nature of allegory and the way in which he intended his book to be read. Now, before I read this, I just want to tell you that what he's about to describe is the way that everybody was reading Scripture at this time. The Jews and the Christians, everybody was reading Scripture in this fourfold manner. But Dante is putting it into a vernacular poem, and it's a radical accomplishment. So he says this: the meaning of this work is not simple. That doesn't mean it's not easy. That means it's complex. For we obtain one meaning from the letter of it, and another from that which the letter signifies. And the first is called literal, but the other allegorical or mystical. And to make this matter of treatment clearer, it may be studied in the verse, and he quotes a verse from the Psalms. When Israel came out of Egypt, and the house of Jacob from among strange people, Judah was his sanctuary, and Israel his dominion. So the image in the Psalms is about the exodus from Egypt. For if we regard the letter alone, what is set before us is the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt in the days of Moses. That's what the psalm is talking about. It happened, it's historical, everybody who's believing it all believes it, and you'd stop there if you were just telling a literal story. But people have interpreted it allegorically. If the allegory, our redemption wrought by Christ. So the Christian church took the image of the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, from the Old Testament, and proclaimed that the Old Testament was a prefiguration, was a prediction, was a foreshadowing of the Christian revelation, so that the exodus from Egypt becomes an allegory of redemption wrought by Christ. But he doesn't stop there. If the moral sense, we are shown the conversion of the soul from the grief and wretchedness of sin to the state of grace. So if I'm sinning daily, I'm addicted to this or that poison, and one day I say no more, I hit bottom, I say no, and I give it up, and I find a new life, I am as if like the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, and as if being redeemed by Christ from sin. And finally, if the anagogical, we are shown the departure of the holy soul from the thraldom of this corruption to the liberty of eternal glory. So the anagogical is the hardest level to think about as you're reading through, but it's about the direct relation between the soul and God. And the exodus from Egypt becomes an image of the soul's exodus from the fallenness of time and space into the presence of God. And although these mystical meanings are called by various names, they may all be called in general allegorical, since they differ from the literal and historical. So if I had a blackboard, I would put two categories, literal and allegorical, and under allegorical, I would put allegorical, moral, and anagogical. Okay, do you see? So the word allegory applies in at two levels of the division. Now Dante concludes the letter. The subject of the whole work, then, taken merely in the literal sense, is the state of the soul after death, straightforwardly affirmed. So Dante is taking a journey where he sees what souls go through depending on the state of their souls when they died. Penitent, they're either in purgatory, purging their sins, or in paradise. And impenitent, they're suffering one or another kind of punishment in hell. That's the literal story. For the development of the whole work hinges on and about that. But if indeed the work is taken allegorically, its subject is man, as by good or ill deserts, in the exercise of his free choice, he becomes liable to rewarding or punishing justice. Punishing justice in hell, purgatorial punishment in purgatory, and reward in paradiso. It will be seen that Dante has chosen his illustrative example. It will be seen that Dante has chosen as his illustrative example a text which, taken literally, asserts a historical fact, but which can be interpreted allegorically on three different levels. This suggests that the allegory of the Commedia also may and should find various levels of interpretation, and this is true, both of it and of all great allegories which convey universal truths. All right, questions? Do you get the concept? So I'm going to be hammering the whole time on, yes, that's the literal meaning, but what does it mean allegorically? What is the moral significance? What is the anagogical significance? Okay, I'm going to let you read the other parts of this introduction I've copied for you. She tells us about the greater images. I've given you one of her maps. There's a section called Dante's Universe, which is a recreation of the Ptolemaic image of the universe. And I can talk more about that when we need to, when we get up into the higher spheres. And then you get some various drawings. So you can compare the drawings in this to the ones in the Chardy translation, and they're all going to try to get you directed in a clear way. And then the last page of this is simply a short piece on the chronology of the story. Okay. So let's begin. I'm not going to read the whole poem. There's not time. And but I'm going to point things out as we go. And you're going to ask me questions, and if I can't answer them, I'll try to find out the answer for the next week. What does this mean? Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. In the middle of the way, the road, the path of our life. Okay, this is your first quiz. What is the allegory here? In the middle of the road of our life. What does it mean at the literal level? How old is Dante in 1300? The poem is set in the year 1300. He's writing it in the later years, from the teens to the 20s. 35. He's 35. Why? What does that mean? Why does he set it in that moment? 4 and 10. 3 score and 10. No, 3 score and 10. 4 score and 10 in our time, maybe. We hope. 3 score and 10 is the lifespan of a man, according to the biblical psalm in Scripture. So he's in the middle of his life, and this happens to him. And it's pretty much literally true. It may not be the exact year, but he has a revelation. Dante does, historically, autobiographically. But what does it mean at the other levels? What does it mean to be in the middle of our life's journey? What are we between? So we're between birth and death. So every one of us is in the middle of our life's journey when we start this poem. We're in the middle between heaven and hell in the sense that we have these alternative choices to make. And he says, our life. So it's my life, and it's the life of every man. It's the middle, yes?
I'm sorry. Doesn't it all go back to the concept of free will, too? Because we're at this juncture, and we can make one or two choices.
Of every minute of every day, we're making choices all the time. That's absolutely right. But we're also in the middle of history. Because the world was created, and then according to Christian theology, it was redeemed, and now it's playing itself out to the end of time, whenever that comes, doomsday, judgment day. So we're in the middle of that journey, as a people, as a human race, as anybody, everybody. And of course, we're in the middle of our journey of the soul to God. Where the soul comes into being in the human individual and takes a journey through life, however long it is, and then goes to God. And we're in the middle of that journey. So already the 4 levels are working. Mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. I went astray from the straight road and awoke to find myself alone in a dark wood. All right, so now let's start talking about the images. What's the dark wood? I mean, everybody can speak too. What's the dark wood that we're all in? Life, but not life because it's life. Life because we are sinners. Why are we sinners? Because Adam ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and fell into sin. And remember that the doctrine includes this idea of original sin. That is to say, we are all heirs of Adam's error. We are born into it. We are born fallen unless we choose to associate ourselves with the means that God has provided for our redemption. So it's a dark wood of error. Because we're sinful, because we're fallen, we get things wrong. If we were still in the Garden of Eden, we wouldn't have wrong ideas. Adam did not have any wrong ideas in the Garden of Eden. He just made a wrong choice. And then his children have not only the temptation to make all these wrong choices, but have wrong ideas. The dark wood is also an image of the spiritual condition called hardness of heart, in which sinfulness has so taken possession of the soul as to render it incapable of turning to God or even knowing which way to turn. Don't bother me with the soul. Don't bother me with my free will. Don't bother me with what happens after that. I'm busy. I'm doing my thing. Leave me alone. How many people are in that condition? That is the dark wood. The mountain, which is on the mystical level the image of the soul's ascent to God, is thus on the moral level the image of repentance, by which the sinner returns to God. So Dante's in the dark wood, and he sees this mountain, and he sees the sun shining. Okay, what's the sun? 4 levels. The sun is the sun, so it's light as opposed to darkness, but it's also intellectual light, the light of God, the grace of God, lighting the world, etc. So he sees that up there, and he wants to climb the mountain. It can be ascended directly from the right road, but not from the dark wood, because there the soul's cherished sins have become, as it were, externalized and appear to it like demons or beasts, with a will and power of their own, blocking all progress. Once lost in the dark wood, a man can only escape by so descending into himself that he sees his sin not as an external obstacle. They won't let me. It won't let me. But as the will to chaos and death within him, which is hell. Dante in Hell is illustrating what it means to be in that condition of the spirit. Only when he has died to sin can he repent and purge it. Mount Purgatory and the mountain of Canto 1 are therefore really one and the same mountain, as seen on the far side and on this side of the death unto sin. Giving up the sin in the name of the good. So what are the 3 beasts? The 3 beasts threaten him. They kill people in the woods. And there really were these beasts in the woods of Italy in the Middle Ages.
Dr. Epp, doesn't it seem like he's at least recollecting a personal problem, issue with God? He's strayed from the past, and as he's writing it seems like he's past that, but it seems like he's remembering.
Correct. And autobiographically, literally, Dante saw the divine speak to him through the image of Beatrice, the young woman that he met. I'm going to talk a little more about his biography, maybe later or maybe next time. And that put him on the path. He thought everything was love. He was so moved by her that his response to everybody was love. He says so in his earlier poems. And then she dies, and he forgets her, and he goes chasing girls, and then he gets married, and he has children, and he's busy. and he's politically active, and he's thinking about this world. And suddenly he gets exiled, and he wonders, what's it all about? What's it really about? And so this journey is, in a sense, an allegorization of his own life experience of having to wake up. And so, but he can't get there by just knowing. Seeing the sun is like knowledge, the knowledge of God, intellectual, left brain stuff. He's got to go in and realize what he did wrong. And he can't do that. He does it at the end of Purgatorio. He finally weeps over his own sin. But he can't do that until he's seen what sin leads to in all of its forms. And he takes us on the same journey. We have a hard time doing it too until we can see what the sin really looks like. All those punishments in hell that you're reading about, they're not just punishments for sins committed in life. They are allegorical representations of the sin itself. The blindness, the willfulness, the cruelty, those are all incarnated in a sense in the images of the Inferno. So what are the three beasts? Images of sin. They may be identified with lust, pride, and avarice, or with the sins of youth, manhood, and age, but they are perhaps best thought of as the images of the three types of sin, which, if not repented, land the soul in one or another of the three main divisions of hell. The Gay Leopard, this is one of the places where Chardy and Dorothy Sayers disagree, and I agree with Dorothy Sayers, because I just think he gets it backwards about the she-wolf. But she says, the Gay Leopard is the image of the self-indulgent sins, incontinence. That is, your temptations run away with you. You don't stop them. You let them guide you. In Plato's imagery, it's the lower self dictating to the higher self instead of the other way around. The fierce lion is an image of the violent sins, and or bestiality, becoming like a beast. We become violent. We become like beasts when we're violent. And the she-wolf is an image of the malicious sins, which involve fraud. We're going to talk about the structure of hell based on those three ideas pretty soon. So leopard, lion, and she-wolf. And he's driven back because he has not yet seen the reality as it is. And you cannot climb the mountain directly unless you repent. And you don't repent unless you can see what's wrong with what you're doing. So somebody appears to him, a ghost. And it turns out to be Virgil. Glory and light of poets at line about 80. Now may the zeal and love's apprenticeship that I poured out on your heroic verses serve me well. For you are my true master and first author, the sole maker from whom I drew the breath of that sweet style whose measures have brought me honor. Okay, so there was a style of poetry from Sicily, from the court of Frederick II, which was a very formalistic, and we would say, Dante would say, somewhat artificial style. And it moved to Tuscany, Dante's area, Florence and around there. And it was converted eventually to something they called the sweet new style, il dolce stil nuovo, the sweet new style. And it was a style of poetry that was less structured, slightly less structured, still very structured, but more personal, more intimate, more honest, more direct. And Dante gets the inspiration for that from other poets and gives inspiration to other poets, but he finds that capacity to be direct and intense and personal and immediate and so on in Virgil. And Virgil's great masterpiece, the Aeneid and also his other poetry. So what is Virgil? Well, you have it here, I think. Virgil in the story is the shade of the poet who, in the Aeneid, celebrated the origin and high destiny of the Roman Empire and its function in unifying the civilized world. That's the point of the Aeneid. They got out of Troy, they came to Italy, they founded Rome, and Rome rules the world. This was written under Augustus Caesar, the Pax Romana. And for Dante, why is that important? Because it is under that Roman government which is governing the whole known world, that Christ comes into the world to redeem mankind. And it is that Rome converted to Christianity that becomes the foundation of Christendom. So that Dante associates classical Rome with Christian Rome, and therefore sees the ancient Romans as preparing the way for redemption. In the Middle Ages, Virgil was looked upon as having been an unconscious prophet of Christianity, and also in popular tradition as a great white magician, whose natural virtue gave him power among the dead, like Prospero in Shakespeare's Tempest, not like Dr. Faustus, who's a black magician. Dante's portrait of him has preserved traces of these medieval fancies, and he also agrees very well with what we know of the gentle and charming characteristics of the real Virgil. In the allegory, okay, that's the historical Virgil from whom Dante learns poetry. In the allegory, Virgil is the image of human wisdom, the best that man can become on his own strength without the especial grace of God. So he's a pre-Christian. He's doing the best that a human being can do rationally without the Christian revelation.
Isn't that heresy? Is that why he was exiled?
No, we're going to come to the heretics. Yeah, but we'll see where Virgil is in a couple of cantos. I will get to it, I hope. He is the best of human philosophy, the best of human morality. He is also poetry and art, and the best of human feeling and imagination. Virgil, as the image of these things, cannot himself enter heaven or bring anyone else there. Art and morality and philosophy cannot be made into substitutes for religion. What does that mean? Art isn't religion. Science isn't religion. People make them into religions, but they aren't salvific. You have actually to receive the grace of God. It can't just be, oh, I know all about the grace of God. But Virgil can, under the direction of the heavenly wisdom, be used to awaken the soul to a realization of its own sinfulness. This is why we write poems like this one. This is why I teach school, because I can use reason to get to people to say, you know, your reasoning is faulty in this and this way, and if they break through and realize that, then they may be able to take the next step. And it can thereafter accompany and assist it towards the state of natural perfection, in which it is again open to receive the immediate operation of divine grace. So Virgil can prepare Dante to see Beatrice. And that's what happens. He gets two almost full canticles of Virgilian knowledge and wisdom, what can be known to the human reason without grace, without revelation. And then that prepares him readies him to be able to receive the vision of Beatrice, who is the incarnation of grace for him. We'll talk more about that when we get to the end of the Purgatorio. So Virgil says at line 88, he must go by another way who would escape this wilderness, for that mad beast that flies before you there suffers no man to pass. You can't escape sin by bypassing it. You've got to go down before you can go up. All right, Canto 2. Dante begins it with an invocation. What's an invocation? Every poet starts every epic poem with an invocation of the muse. What is the muse? The muses were thought of as the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, memory, and each was in charge of one of the art forms. And she provided inspiration. Now, if you've ever sat down and tried to paint a painting, or write a book, or a poem, or bake a cake without inspiration, what happens? Nothing. Or it turns out awful. It's dead. And then suddenly you go, oh, I know what I've got in the kitchen that I can use. Yeah, that'll work. And then you pull it out, and then you put it in, and then it turns into a delicious cake. Or, that's how I can tell this story. Or, whatever it is that comes to you. Now, every great poet knows that he can't do this on his own. He needs inspiration. So he invokes the muse's help. And you cannot command the muse. I think you've heard me say this before. You can invite the muse. You can prepare a place for the muse, but you cannot command her. She will appear or not as she pleases. And all you can do is get ready. And then when she appears, you've got something to work with. So you master the art, you master the technique, you study words, you study language, you study philosophy and history and science and everything else, and you get ready. And then if the muse speaks through you, it works. And if she doesn't, so he begins, O muses, high genius, be my aid, O memory. These 3 things he calls upon. The muses, his high genius, that's the spirit that inspires him from within, and the power of memory. Because he's going to have to retell this whole thing. And of course what he really means is invention. Okay. So Dante says, wait a minute, I can't take a trip through hell. I am not Aeneas. In the Aeneid of Virgil, in Book 6, Aeneas goes to the underworld. And he gets a vision of the future of Rome from his father, Anchises. Because he's worthy, and he's pius Aeneas, pious Aeneas. And he's charged with founding Rome. But I'm not Aeneas, and I'm not Paul. There's a story of Paul going through the underworld. How should I dare, line 31? By whose permission? I am not Aeneas, I am not Paul. Who could believe me worthy of the vision? This is Dante saying, I know you think I'm just some dumb Italian Florentine poet claiming to have knowledge of the divine, but it's not me doing this. I am a vehicle. And so Virgil says, well, you're right, but I had a visit from a lady in heaven named Beatrice, and she is so sorry for your complete benightedness that she sends me to bring you through hell. Because unless you see it, you can't see what you've been doing. You can't see the meaning of it. And so I'm happy to serve her. And how did she know about this? Because she gets a visit from Lucia, the saint who's the patron of light. And how did she know? Because she got a visit from the Virgin Mary, who sits at the right hand of God. And so he's got these 3 ladies who are interested in him in successive descents. So what happens? The minute he hears Beatrice is on my side, let's go. I'm willing to go through hell to get to see Beatrice. Okay. But it's not going to be easy, because the first thing that he says, that he sees after he lets go, is this government posted warning sign. Per me si va nella città dolente. Through me, you get to the city of woe. Eterno dolore, eternal dolor, or misery. Perduta la perduta gente, the lost people. Eternity made me. I stand outside time forever. And he ends this way, line 369. Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate. Abandon hope, you who enter here. Now just think of all the things you're hoping for. Just like right now. It could be, that you pass your driver's license retest tomorrow. It could be heaven. It could be anything in between. Lasciate ogni speranza. Abandon all hope, you who enter here. This is the end of hope. And Dante says at lines 18 that these are the souls, le genti dolorose, the miserable people, c'hanno perduto il ben dell'intelletto, who have lost the good of the intellect. That's not that they've lost intellect, they're conscious. They've lost the good of the intellect. What does this mean? What the lost souls have lost is not the intellect itself, which still functions mechanically, but the good of the intellect. That is, the knowledge of God who is truth. For Dante, as for Aquinas, intellect does not mean what we call colloquially braininess. It means the whole reasonable or rational soul of man. So they've still got a rational soul, otherwise punishments wouldn't mean anything. They're not just animals or unconscious. But their intellect cannot see or do or choose the good. It's too late. The chance is over. And then he adds this surprising, Master, what gnaws at them so hideously? Their lamentation stuns the very air. And Virgil says at line 41, 42, they have no hope of death. And in their blind and unattaining state, their miserable lives have sunk so low that they must envy every other fate. So they're shouting and screaming in pain. He meets Charon, who doesn't want to take him across, and Virgil says something he's going to repeat over and over. This is meant to be where what is willed happens, like that is by God. So you can't stand in the way, because Dante's breaking all the rules, going to hell while still alive. Now what happens at the end, towards the end of the canto, is that la tema si volve in desio, at line 123. Divine justice transforms and spurs them so that their dread turns wish. They yearn for what they fear. Now, we've seen images of this. Okay, let's just jump and get it over with. Gloucester jumping off that imaginary cliff. Just get it over with. Or it's too late, I might as well. They plunge into whatever the sin may be. Here, all souls are longing to get across this river into hell, because, and they're terrified of it, but they desire it. They desire, and the terror and the desire are the same thing. And if you just think about it enough, you'll realize that seems paradoxical on the surface, but in reality it's not. We all do it in our way when we choose hell. All right, Canto 4. Limbo. What is limbo? The church, I think, has abandoned the idea of limbo now. But Dante still had it. It's, well, before we get, did I talk about the opportunists? I didn't talk about the opportunists. So in that same Canto 3, we have souls rushing around in all directions, being stung and dripping pus and following a flag that changes colors and goes in all different directions. Who are they? The opportunists. So why are they here? They're not even quite in hell. They're in the vestibule of hell because they refuse to choose either good or evil. If they'd chosen evil, they would be deeper in hell. They think they'd be better off, but of course they wouldn't. But they didn't choose the good either. So they're just stung and tormented because of choosing me instead of the good. I am called to choose the good in every situation. But if I say, forget the good, forget the evil, everything's relative, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to do what I want. I mean, Jeremy Bentham is kind of the exaltation of this idea. Just, you know, the greatest good for the greatest number, regardless of whether doing this is good or evil. So it's a superficial idea, and it leads to this. Running around with no real direction and no goal perpetually. Okay, then we get to limbo. And in limbo, we have the virtuous pagans. Now, this annoys some people. And it's a good thing that it does, because we admire our virtuous pagans. Where would we be without Plato and Aristotle and Virgil? And it's no fair. They were born before Christ. They couldn't be saved. They didn't know. They didn't live in Jerusalem and get even predictions of some Messiah in the future. They were just doing the best they could in the light of reason. All right, so if you're annoyed by this, you're reading it at the literal level. Yes? Now I'm challenging you. Let's go to the allegorical level. What does it mean allegorically? Why is Virgil in limbo, this ideal of Dante's? Because they trusted the intellect, the human intellect, without revelation of God. So let's just see what Dorothy Sayers says. After those who refuse choice come those without opportunity of choice. They could not, that is, choose Christ. They could and did choose human virtue, and for that they have their reward. What is their condition? They are senza speme vivemo in desio. We are without hope, living in desire. We have desire, but no hope. That's their only punishment. They're not being tortured, they're not being burnt alive, they're not being crushed, they're not being bludgeoned. They're just living there. And the best ones, Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, are living in a great, beautiful meadow with light and air, and it's quite pleasant. So what's the problem? Why is it hell? Because they have desire but no hope. They cannot be redeemed. All right. Now, this is only the virtuous pagans. Pagans who chose evil by their own standards are judged by those standards and are found lower down, okay? Let's say you didn't know about Christ, but you were a thief. You're going to be punished as a thief because you knew you shouldn't be a thief. Okay, but here again, the souls have what they chose. They enjoy the kind of afterlife which they themselves imagined for the virtuous dead. Now, if you read Socrates' Phaedo, he has an image of the next life, and he is the one figure in all of Western civilization who went to death perfectly convinced that it was a good thing, that he was doing the right thing, and therefore the gods would take care of him. So, but his image of the next life for the virtuous is you get to sit around and talk and learn answers, and maybe the gods will help you learn some answers to the questions that we couldn't quite answer here. So, their failure, says Sayers, it lay in not imagining better. They are lost, as Virgil says later in the Purgatorio, because they had not faith. Primarily the Christian faith, but also more generally, faith in the nature of things. The allegory is clear, she says. It is the weakness of humanism to fall short in the imagination of ecstasy. At its best, it is noble, reasonable, and cold. And however optimistic about a balanced happiness in this world, it is pessimistic about a rapturous eternity. Sometimes wistfully aware that others claim the experience of this positive bliss, the humanist can neither accept it by faith, embrace it by hope, nor abandon himself to it in charity. Caritas, that means caring, or another translation, of course, is love.
Do we have that section you just read in a handout?
No. That's why you need me. You could go by the Dorothy Sayers and read the notes, because it's worth doing. She's great. She's just great. So I'm just pretending to teach you Dante. Actually, I'm a medium for Dorothy Sayers. Dante discusses the question further in the Purgatorio and makes his full doctrine explicit in the Paradiso. All right, so if we read this allegorically, it's not just that God is, unmercifully punishing poor Socrates, who is doing the best he can. For Dante, Socrates represents the principle of the worship of the human intellect. We can achieve everything we're meant to by our own capacity to reason well. It's not that they didn't know about virtue. It's not that they didn't know about free will. But they didn't have the imagination of redemption, of heaven, of perfection, of the divine. And you could argue with Dante, come on, Socrates did too, or Plato did, at the literal level. And that's an okay argument to make if you want to. But you've got to understand what he means at the allegorical level. And at that level, we are surrounded by these people who are doing their best and virtuously to achieve a good life in this life and have no use for God, for eternity, for redemption, for perfection, etc. And, you can count the numbers of those people around you at your leisure. Now, we have a special extra touch here. A bunch of poets come over. Homer, the five greatest poets of the ancient world. Homer, Horace, Ovid, Lucan, and Virgil. And Dante says they included me in their own number. Who the hell does he think he is? So guess what? If he weren't who he thought he was, we wouldn't be reading this, and it wouldn't matter. Some proud poet who thought he was puffed up and was as great as Homer or Virgil lived in the Middle Ages. We don't pay him any attention. He was just an egomaniac. But that's not what happened. We're reading it. Why are we reading it? Because he was right. in the modern world since the Middle Ages, there are two poets of unmatched towering greatness, Shakespeare and Dante. Eliot says everything swings between the two and there is no third. So Dante knew what he was trying to do. He knew what his aspiration was. It was exactly to be one of those five that he admired so much, in his own terms, in Christian, vernacular Italian, to him, modern terms. But he had the judgment to know that he could do it, or to believe that he could do it. And he did it. And we're reading it because he succeeded. And in fact, we would say that apart from Homer and Virgil, there's nobody in any ancient or modern that's the equal of Dante. But you can make your own judgment about that after you've read the book. So we'll see. And then there are other virtuous pagans, and he lists a whole bunch of them. Philosophers and leaders and scientists and so on. Okay, onward to the lustful. Now, surprisingly, we're going to see some pretty lustful people in Purgatorio and in Paradiso. So what's the difference? Why are these lustful in hell? Because they didn't repent before they died. And that makes all the difference at every level. You repent before you die, God has mercy, and then you may have to do some punishments, purgatorial punishments in Purgatorio, which we'll talk about, but you're going to heaven. There are only two ultimate ends for every human soul, either hell or heaven. There's no third way. Purgatorio is intermediary and it is temporary. But you don't repent, you don't get to purgatory. So who does he see here? Paolo and Francesca. And what are they guilty of? They're guilty of lust. And what is lust? Sayers says so we're in the levels now of incontinence. Below limbo, we enter the first division of hell, and it's the level of incontinence, that is obeying uncontrolled desire, or not controlling desire. And the first and least worst, let's say, is lust, because everybody has it. It's just built into the nature of human beings to be sexual beings. But she says the image here is sexual, although we need not confine the allegory to the sin of unchastity. Lust is a type of shared sin. At its best, and so long as it remains a sin of incontinence only, there is mutuality in it and exchange. Although in fact mutual indulgence only serves to push both parties along the road to hell, it is not in intention wholly selfish. For this reason, Dante, with perfect orthodoxy, rates it as the least hateful of the deadly sins. Sexual sins in which love and mutuality have no part find their place far below. So it's love, it's real erotic desire, it's mutual, they care for one another, but it's outside marriage. So she has an affair with her brother, with her husband's brother, and the husband finds them and kills them. And they go to hell. They don't repent before they die. What are the deadly sins? Why does she call them deadly sins, the mortal sins? They are, in Latin, the capital sins, meaning the head, or like headwaters of sin, the roots of sin. In the Purgatory, we're going to have a sevenfold division of Purgatory. Each kind of sin, of the seven root sins, punished on one of the cornices of Purgatory. So here we've got one of the 7 deadly sins is lust, but it's, as she says, it's not just sexual lust. It's any kind of desire that takes you over against the good of the intellect, against what you know you ought to do by all morality and so on. And they're blown about in this wind. Minos is the judge. So in the classical, let me talk about the monsters. All through the Inferno, there are, at the transitions, there are various kinds of monsters. Classical, mythological figures. Who are they? What are they? Dante does not believe that they are real beings guarding the various levels of hell. They are allegories of the kind of sin that's going to be punished at each level. So Minos was one of the judges of the underworld. And in the classical world, you go to the land of the dead, Hades, and you get sent to whatever kind of punishment you're going to undergo by Minos and Rhadamanthus. So Dante takes Minos, turns him into a kind of monster. This is all based on, usually based on medieval versions of classical mythology. And he makes him kind of the judge of what level they're to be at hell. So Minos is a medievalized version of the classical judge of the underworld. He may image an accusing conscience. The souls are damned on their own confession. For hell being the place of self-knowledge in sin, there can be no more self-deception here. Similarly, even in the circles of fraud, all the shades tell Dante the truth about themselves. This is poetically convenient, but given this conception of hell, it must be so. They're finally facing what they chose in life. The literally damned, having lost the good of the intellect, cannot profit by their self-knowledge. Allegorically, for the living soul, this vision of the hell in the self is the preliminary to repentance and restoration. So we're taking a literal journey with a literal Dante through these levels, but this is all happening in a vision. Why has he been given this vision? The whole poem is based on a vision, and the vision is showing him in hell what the sin really looks like. Self-knowledge in sin. The black wind, so the lovers are blown about by this black wind. They can't really be together. Every time they pass by each other, they howl some more. As the lovers drifted into self-indulgence and were carried away by their passions, so now they drift forever. The bright, voluptuous sin is now seen as it is, a howling darkness of helpless discomfort. And then she says this wonderful thing, and I want you to remember it. The punishment for the sin is simply the sin itself, experienced without illusion. The punishment for the sin is simply the sin itself, experienced without illusion. If you think about it, that is as terrifying a sentence as any. Because think of all the illusions we carry with us in order to keep ourselves going and make ourselves feel better and justify our existences. It's pretty scary when you have to come face to face without illusion to your own fallenness. Okay. They betrayed reason to their appetite, and Dante, there's a passage where he starts 3 different tercets with the word. There are lots of these verbal tricks that he engages in as he goes. Not tricks, but figures of speech. And in Canto 5, at line about 100, that's probably significant. The word amor appears at the beginning of the line, and it appears at the beginning of the next tercet and the next one after that. Amor, amor, amor. So you're John Chardy translation, page 61, or no, you have a different page number. Anyway, it's Canto 5, page 49, okay, line about 100 or 80 or 95 or 6. Love which in the gentlest hearts will soonest bloom seized my lover with passion. This is Francesca talking. For that sweet body from which I was torn unshriven to my doom. Unshriven means she didn't repent. Love which permits no loved one not to love took me so strongly with delight in him that we are one in hell as we were above. Love led us to one death. In the depths of hell, Cain waits for him who took our lives. So you were murdered by your husband, and he's down way below. This was the piteous tale they stopped to tell. Now what happens to Dante? He hears this. Francesca, he says, what you suffer here melts me to tears of pity and pain. And he says, how did it happen? And she says, we were reading that book called Lancelot, where Lancelot and Guinevere kiss. Guinevere's married to King Arthur. It's a famous adulterous relationship. So she says, that book and he who wrote it was a pander, that is a go-between. That day we read no further. Why? Because they read about their kiss and they decided they were going to kiss each other. And they fell into an adulterous relation and they got killed. And then what happens to Dante is he faints. Boom. Well, it makes it easier for Virgil to carry him to the next circle without telling us the transition. But there's another reason, an allegorical reason. What is it that led Paolo and Francesca into their sin? Feelings. Going by just the feelings. And Dante is moved by the same easy pity, feeling it for them, as what moved them. So a colleague of mine has the theory that Dante experiences a non-sinful version of each of the things that he sees punished in hell. That is, the extreme sin is what he's seeing punished, but there's a way to have feeling for somebody that doesn't become sin necessarily. So Dante's feeling for Paolo and Francesca, sympathetic, sorrowful, is that. It's not in itself sinful, although further down he's going to stop feeling pity for the damned, because it's wrong to do it. But here it's not wrong to do it, it's the natural degree of feeling that you might legitimately have, so long as you don't overstep the bounds of virtue. All right, questions so far? I'm moving pretty fast, yes?
Just wondering if is he having a bit of a flashback the way he feels about Beatrice? I mean, he sees this and thinks, how close did I come with Beatrice?
No, he did feel that way about another woman after Beatrice died, yes, but not about Beatrice. His love for Beatrice, according to everything he says, was never lustful. He met her when he was 9 years old, first of all.
So with this other woman, maybe he faints in a way thinking, I came close to that myself.
Yeah, if I weren't for Virgil taking me through this process, if I hadn't been given the gift of this vision, that's right. In fact, all of these things, he was, one of the things he was accused of in Florence was sacrilege to items in the church. He broke we'll get to it, but he broke a baptismal fountain to save a boy from drowning, a baby from drowning. And he was accused later by his enemies of having no respect for Christian sacraments, which wasn't true at all. He tells the story to justify himself. So at each stage, I mean, well, his real, the real thing he's afraid of, he's going to tell us in Purgatorio. I'll save that for later. Okay, Canto 6, we have the gluttons. So the least worst surrender to one's desire is sexual or erotic. But the next least worst is food, because we all desire food. We all are hungry. We all need to eat. But we can make a fetish of eating and of food and go beyond virtue in doing so. And we see here Chaco the hog, who did exactly that. Gluttony was his offense. And of course, he didn't repent for it. So they're sitting under filth and dirt and hailstones of corruption and sitting in filth. It's basically, I don't want to get too vulgar, but they made food into feces, and now they're having to have feces as their food. It's all very backwards and disgusting. But I want to be remembered in the world, says Chaco. And everybody does up to a certain point. And then they say, no, don't tell, because the lowest of the low don't want to be known in the world. But Dante gives them what they want. He tells us about them because they should be honored for what they did that was good in the world, independent of their being damned for this or that sin. Okay, so Master, I said, I'm at the end of Canto 6. When the great clarion fades, that's the great trumpet sounds for Doomsday, Judgment Day, into the voice of thundering omniscience, that is when the trumpet fades away and God speaks judgment to all mankind. What of these agonies that the damned are experiencing? Will they be the same or more or less after the final sentence? And Virgil says, look to your science, by which he means Aristotle, who says, the more a thing is perfect, the more it feels of pleasure and of pain. As for these souls, though they can never soar to true perfection, still in the new time they will be nearer it than they were before. So they're going to get their bodies, because the church teaches the resurrection of the body, so they will be more perfect. They will be complete human beings again. Now they're just shades, but eventually they'll have their bodies again. They'll be reunited to their bodies. But now they're going to suffer these same punishments, not just as shades, but in the physical body. So that's going to be more perfect damnation. Okay, so the philosophy of Aristotle there is incorporated into St. Thomas Aquinas. That's where Dante's getting this. Canto 7. We come to Plutus, who is the god of wealth, the ancient god of wealth. And he's saying, Papa Satan, Pape Satan Alepe. And the critics or the scholars have worked and worked and worked to figure out what he's talking about. And the point is, it's nonsense, because it's a language that means nothing. It's balderdash. It's muttering. No power of his, however, he may lord it over the damned, may hinder your descent. They can't stop you. He tells Plutus to shut up, and mentions Michael, the angel Michael, who is the archangel Michael, who defeats the rebel angels. And so what we have here is hoarders and wasters. What does that mean? So we had the lustful, That's incontinence of the erotic desire. And then we had the gluttonous, that's incontinence of the desire to eat and drink. And now we've got the incontinence of possessions, of owning things, of having things. But it's very interesting because Dante gives us its opposite, which is wasting things. Now, why is wasting, let's say, you care about nothing, not people, not human beings, not your family, not anything but gold. You want more, you want to possess, you want to own, you want to buy. Okay, so that's the sin of avarice. But what are these people doing wasting? What does that mean? They're spending, they're throwing, they're wasting instead of using it for good. What are physical possessions for? They are not just to have, and they are not just to throw away. They are to be used for virtuous purposes. You got too much? Great, give it to the poor. You want to be perfect? Give everything to the poor and follow me, says Jesus. But not these guys. They're just burning and destroying. And he says, now may you see, line 61, the fleeting vanity of the goods of fortune for which men tear down all that they are to build a mockery. Not all the gold that is or ever was under the sky could buy for one of these exhausted souls the fraction of a pause. They can't not suffer. They're running around in the circle of hell and crashing into each other and then turning back and running around the other way, crashing into each other again. The hoarders on this side and the wasters here, boom, and then the hoarders and boom again. It's just fruitless running around, which is what the true image of hoarding or wasting is. Why? It's the worship of material goods, not as the gifts of God to be used by man's free will for good, but as something to be valued for itself. And if you do that, this is how you end up. It turns to nothing or suffering. Now he talks about fortune. So Dante has a very particular role for Fortuna. Fortuna is an ancient Roman goddess, and she was in charge of the goods of the world. And she was known to be inconsistent, so she might give you a whole lot of good luck and good fortune, and you rise in society and you make a lot of money, and then you might lose it all. There'd be a depression, or there could be a run on the market, or whatever happens, and then you lose it. So in the Middle Ages, she was pictured as sitting with her feet on the globe of the world and turning a wheel. It was like a spinning wheel or a wagon wheel. And very often on the cathedrals, certain cathedrals in Spain and France, and I think maybe some in Italy, the outside of the west front of the cathedral was a wheel, and it was the wheel of fortune. And sometimes there was a king at the top of the wheel and a beggar at the bottom. And as fortune turns her wheel, the king falls down and becomes a beggar, and the beggar rises up and becomes a king. She's blindfolded. She's not intentionally caring about any individual person. She's just redistributing the fortunes of the world. So she was often called a whore or a strumpet because she wasn't faithful to any one man. Shakespeare has a lot of allusions to the strumpet fortune. But Dante says, no, that's not what's really going on here. It's true that she does that. She gives, and then she takes away. She gives, and then she takes away. But she's doing it under the government of God. She's doing it because that's what he wants her to be doing, because he doesn't want people to marry their possessions. He wants them to see them as changeable, see them as subject to fortune, and not the real thing, not the thing that matters. So there's a great fact about the Fortune's wheel on the outside of the cathedral. So picture the west front of a cathedral, and you have the tympanum, usually with the Last Judgement, and all these gargoyles outside around the cathedral. And in the center is this great wheel with maybe a king falling down and a beggar, and she turns the wheel and they change. Now you go into the church and you look back up at that same architectural element. And from the inside, it is no longer a wheel, it is a rose. It is the mystic rose, which is a symbol of the Virgin Mary and of paradise, as Dante will give us at the very end of the Paradiso. And all the cathedrals were dedicated to the Virgin Mary. They were all Our Lady of whatever the name of the city. So we say Notre Dame and we think of Paris, but it's also Notre Dame de Chartres, Notre Dame de Reims, Notre Dame de any other city that had a cathedral. So you go into the church and you are in the domain of the Virgin of Redemption. And the rose then symbolizes heaven and symbolizes the Virgin who gives us the path to heaven. So from the outside, the same thing looks like the wheel of fortune, spinning us around and being unfaithful. But from the inside of the church, it is seen to be the work of God when it's seen from the right side, which is the inside. Okay. All right, after fortune, we go down to circle 5 in Canto 8. I think I've explained that enough. Canto 8, we have wrath. The wrathful and the sullen. So this is the incontinence of just flying into a rage, but its opposite is equally sinful, and that is sullen rejection of God's redemption. So let me read the notes here, because they're so good. Dante condemns one of these violent sinners in Canto 8. It's who is it? Vanni Fucci? No, it's sorry, Filippo Argenti. He was so tied to the material world that he was said to have shoed his horse's feet with silver. So he was called Argenti. But he was wrathful, violent, murderous. He was a Florentine knight of the Adimari family, of very violent temper, and so purse-proud that he is said to have had his horse shod with silver. The Adimari were of the opposite faction to Dante and bitterly opposed his recall from banishment. He knows particularly awful things about, I didn't get into all the murders that went on among the conflicts, which I can return to when we want to focus on them. But Dante is so angry at him that he says he doesn't faint with pity as he did for Paolo and Francesca. Or, I'm going to be nice to Chaco the hog and keep his name alive. May you weep and wail to all eternity, for I know you, hell dog, filthy as you are. Then he stretched both hands to the boat, But warily the master shoved him back, crying, "Down, down with the other dogs." And then Virgil says to Dante, "Indignant spirit, I kiss you as you frown. Blessed be she who bore you." In world and time, this one was haughtier yet. Not one unbending graces his memory. Here is his shadow in slime. How many living now chancellors of wrath shall come to lie here yet in this pigmire, leaving a curse to be their aftermath. All right, but what does this mean? Dante sounding not very Christian. May you weep and wail to all eternity, hell dog. So we're going to unpack this a little. Virgil says to him, Blessed is the womb that bare thee. Blessed is she who bore you. It is important to understand this passage, since otherwise we may feel that Virgil is blasphemously encouraging Dante in very cruel and unchristian behavior. We must distinguish here between the literal and allegorical meanings, which the poem fuses into a single image. Okay, literally, we're at the literal level. In hell, the soul is fixed eternally in that which it has chosen. It cannot, that is, enjoy there the good which it has rejected. Therefore, the reaction it calls forth from Dante can be no more than the reflection of what it has in itself. Dante's reaction to the souls in hell is a reflection of what they have chosen. Paolo and Francesca chose just feeling. Dante shows them that feeling. This guy chose violence and blood. Wrath. Dante shows him wrath. Thus, Francesca calls forth the same easy pity which betrayed her to lust. Ciacco, the perfunctory pity, which is all that the egotist can spare for his neighbors. The hoarders and wasters, because they made no distinctions in life, are indistinguishable in eternity. Dante isn't told any particular ones. But the wrathful have rejected pity and chosen cruelty. Therefore, they can receive no pity. And goodness can only manifest itself to them as wrath, since they have chosen to know it so. Okay, do you get this? What you choose in life is what you get in hell. They've chosen to turn all pity into wrath. They can receive no pity, but only wrath. That's what they've chosen. That's at the literal level. Now, allegorically, in the vision of hell, the soul knows itself in a state of sin. Up to this moment, Dante has only wondered, grieved, pitied, or trembled. Now, for the first time, he sees in the image of the damned soul sin as it is, vile, degraded, and dangerous, and turns indignantly against it. For whatever inadequate and unworthy reasons, he accepts judgment and places himself on God's side. It is the first feeble stirring of the birth of Christ within the soul, and Virgil accordingly hails it with words that were used of Christ himself. The reference is Luke 11:27. Blessed be she that bore you. Okay, do you get this? So this is happening in both levels at the same time. At the level of the literal, we're seeing that the sin the man chooses in life is what he experiences as punishment in hell. But we're also seeing Dante's journey, Dante's experience of this, as coming down on the side of the righteous, of God, of the good, against the wrathful, against the sinners. And Virgil rewards him with this praise. Okay. At the end of Canto 9, we have a reference. I don't have much time left. I think I'm going to just finish 9 and then all right, actually, No, I'm going to stop here and we'll start with 9 Tuesday. I'm going to take questions. Everybody remember that I'm starting with 9, okay? I'm reading back and forth so much. I want to see if you have any questions, and then I have one question for you. Yes?
Well, the obvious reference here, it's kind of jarring when he says, blessed is the womb of your mother. An obvious reference to the canticle of Mary and Luke, and sort of makes Dante Christ-like. And
So what?
It's jarring to hear
Yes.
that kind of reference when you know, and I think they would have had the Hail Mary at that time. So if you didn't know your Bible, you would know the Hail Mary prayer. And that has to come right away and just hit you and go, whoa, what are you talking about?
So that's why I'm saying it's so important to understand the allegory, because what does Dorothy Sayers mean by the birth of Christ in the soul? The redemption of the individual. So the redemption of mankind happens by the literal story, right? The incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, everybody has the opportunity to be saved. But at the level of the individual soul, almost you could say at the anagogical level, the soul's relation to God, there has to come a moment when the human soul says yes to the redemption that Christ makes available. That is not a historical event. It's a historical event for that individual, but it's something that happens within the soul.
It could be that, it seems to me in our time, we always have the smiling Jesus, and the Jesus is forgiving and all that. There's still the Jesus who cleans out the temples and the money changers. And it seems in our time, maybe not in that time, in our time, it's jarring to me because we never have the Jesus who says, hey, you can't sin, it's bad.
No, in our time, it's a terrible collapse, in fact. But in the Middle Ages, I said there's the last judgment on the west tympanum of the cathedrals, and sitting in judgment is Jesus, the Pantocrator, the judge of all, and he's casting these guys into hell and these guys sending to heaven. So he was terrifying. Now, I'm going to tell you a 1,000-year-old joke. You've heard it before. Why were all these cathedrals devoted to the Virgin Mary? Because she was the image of compassion and forgiveness. And so the joke is that Jesus comes down to St. Peter at the gate and says, Peter, what are you doing? I gave you the keys of the kingdom, and you're letting in all these horrible riffraff insufferables. You're supposed to be keeping them out. And Peter says, I'm not letting them in. I'm chasing them away. But they're going around the back, and your mother's letting them in the back door. Now, why is that a 1,000-year-old joke? Because that is exactly how people felt about the Virgin. If your life went wrong, and you knew it, and you were a mess, and you went to Christ, and he's judging, that the Pantocrator, you're petrified. But you go to the Virgin, she says, okay, I forgive you. It's okay. I'll talk to him about it.
She says, no, you got to make the wine. And Jesus said, I don't want to do that. And Mary says, no, they're running out of wine. You got to do it.
Yeah. So that's the point. But the point you brought up is that the shock of figuring him as Jesus. Nobody's thinking, oh, Dante thinks he's Jesus. That's not the reaction, because people are recognizing this allegorical way of talking. So they recognize that this means that Dante's taking the first step to distance himself from the sins that get punished in hell, and he's going to go through a whole lot of other transformations by the time he gets to the Paradiso, as we'll see, if you stick with me. Okay, is this okay? Am I doing a good thing for you? It's a very tall mountain, this book, to climb, and it's only going to get harder. I will say that Inferno is, responses to the Inferno are all about physical things. It's a lot of physical imagery, and it's sort of about the body. And the Purgatorio is about the heart and the emotions and the transformation of emotion. But the Paradiso is what Dante would think of as the highest function of the mind, which is understanding through grace, through revelation, the theological truth of the nature of reality. So there's going to be a lot of intellectual discussion in the second half of the Purgatorio, and especially in the Paradiso. And we're going to try to clarify the various doctrines that Dante is trying to clarify for his readers. And they're not all easy. So that's what we're going to try to do. And I figure if I just, if we work through it slowly, we can build our doctrinal muscles and be ready. And that's exactly what how Dante sets it up. Each idea that he makes clear prepares us for the next idea and the next and the next, till finally we get a picture of an absolutely unified, consistent, rational whole, except in those places where human beings cannot understand what God is up to at all. And then Dante shows us that that's the case, and we have to accept it. And it's easier to accept then than it is right now, but I'm hoping that he succeeds in bringing us along that very steep path. All right, I'll see you next week, God willing, 7 o'clock, same place. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your being my class. It's really a great honor.